How's it going, Giants fans? Welcome back to Fireside Giants with your boys, Alex and Anthony. Today we're discussing the Giants adding receiver James Washington to the practice squad. Now, we know the Giants have done a pretty damn good job adding talent to this core and, finding guys off the practice squad. Obviously, look at what Jarrad Davis, did in the most recent game against the Eagles. Pretty good. Of course, the notable one, Isaiah Hodgins, who's become probably our best receiver at this point in time, plucked off a practice squad. The Giants have done really good at evaluating and scouting talent and saying, okay, you know what? There's something there. Let's extrapolate on that. James Washington is a talented player. Now, he was coming from the Dallas Cowboys. He was with the Pittsburgh Steelers for a couple years. We'll talk about his game. We'll talk about what he offers, his size, kind of his stats from the past. And if there is anything to extrapolate on his skill set. Now, we are at the end of the season. We are in the playoffs, so don't expect James Washington to be anything for us. Maybe they sign him to a futures contract, and they have him for next year, and he competes alongside guys like Colin Johnson, of course, Isaiah Hodgins, any other receivers that we bring in, and he earns an opportunity to compete on this roster. But nonetheless, I wanted to discuss him, Anthony. Before we do, how you do today, my friend?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to this postseason game on Sunday. And you can never have enough depth going into the postseason, right? There's no such thing as too much depth. And the Giants have been decimated with injuries in many positions this season, but wide receiver maybe more so than any other position, right? So many injuries at that position group. And you hate to say it, but you never know when that next injury is going to happen. So as the Giants prepare for this postseason, they're doing the right thing by just adding more bodies to that wide receiver room. That's really all they're doing here, because if, God forbid, someone else goes down during the postseason, let's say the Giants win a couple games in the postseason, they're making a run, and then one of their receivers goes down, well, now they have a veteran wide receiver in James Washington who could step in there and make an impact. He's a veteran. He's been in the league for 5 years now. He's made some big-time plays for some big teams. He was a member of the Steelers when they were perennial playoff contenders. Now, most recently, he was on the Dallas Cowboys. Didn't play a whole lot, but that's because he was coming off of an injury himself. But he's fully healthy now, and he is ready to go in there and compete on a whim if he needs to. So that's really what I'm getting from the signing, is the Giants are just positioning themselves to, if they have an emergency during the postseason, now they have a solution to that emergency.
That's a very good point. If they do have some sort of emergency, they can call him up and hope for something. But James Washington, as you guys know, has spent some time with the Steelers, spent some time with the Dallas Cowboys this year, actually. He's 5'11", 213 pounds, 26 years old, will be 27 in a couple months. This is a player who had some success as a former second-round pick in 2018 with the Steelers. His rookie season, he played in 14 games and had 217 yards and touchdowns. Nothing crazy, but his second year in the league was pretty solid. 735 yards, 3 scores, and a 55% catch rate. So obviously, you'd like to see a little bit more efficiency in the catching department, given that he's a receiver. But he played in 15 games that season, started in 10, and it's kind of dissipated ever since then. 392 yards in 2020, but he had 5 total touchdowns, so not a bad metric there. And then 2021, 25 years old with Pittsburgh, played in 15 games, 282 yards and a touchdown and 2 touchdowns. He's actually scored a touchdown every single year of his career until this year, mainly because he didn't really get an opportunity with the Dallas Cowboys. But he was dealing with an injury. I think he was activated in November, and he was like, I was healthy, but they didn't really give him an opportunity. They had Noah Brown, they had Michael Gallup get called back up. Obviously, he was dealing with injury as well, and CeeDee Lamb. So you're looking at a guy like James Washington just could not really carve out a role on that team. But our receiver core, we don't have a CeeDee Lamb, so we can pretty much use any amount of talent that we can find. He has had success in the past. I think that he's a decent player, but he might obviously be beyond his prime at this point. I know he's still young, but it seems like the injuries have kind of caught up to him, and the prime may be behind him because of that. Nonetheless, it can't hurt to give a shot for a guy like James Washington, who otherwise, would just be rotting on Dallas Cowboys bench or practice squad. I think that maybe next year he competes. And it's interesting because a lot of people have forgotten about Colin Johnson. Was he 6'5"? I think maybe he's taller than that. He was the tallest receiver in football, and he obviously tore his ACL, and that was really unfortunate. But Anthony, when you're looking at Colin Johnson, just kind of switch gears for a second here, do you think he can actually come back and make an impact next year? Because he was impressing a lot during training camp, and I think that he was pretty much on pace to make the team until the injury. Do you think that he can bounce back and maybe compete for a roster spot in 2023?
Yeah, I think he can bounce back and compete, and he definitely was on track to get a roster spot this offseason, or rather in the summer. But to be fair, if Colin Johnson is out there, we probably don't have Isaiah Hodgins, because they're kind of similar players. They have a similar build, and they have a similar playing style. So, sometimes you can find the silver lining. It's tough to say, but Colin Johnson's injury did open an opportunity, open a door for Isaiah Hodgins to walk in, and now he's a member of the New York Giants, who we're all a huge fan of. I think Hodgins has been excellent for the Giants. So that's kind of the point that I want to segue into is with Isaiah Hodgins on the roster, is it necessary to also have Colin Johnson on the roster, right? And so I also think there's another aspect of this it's tough to answer whether or not Colin Johnson will be here in 2023 because we don't know what the Giants are going to do this offseason in terms of adding talent to that position. Because they might go out there and get a high-end number one wide receiver. Maybe they go trade for DeAndre Hopkins, which I'm sure, now that those rumors have started, we'll get into that into another episode, I'm sure. So maybe they go out there and they get an elite number one receiver, but they don't do anything else and they just retain everybody else. Or maybe they don't go that route and they just add a solid rookie as their number one, and then they add another solid rookie in the middle rounds, right? And then they just kind of build the same ragtag team, but a little bit better that they've had this year. And then you could see a window of opportunity for Colin Johnson. Now, I really like Colin Johnson. He is just a huge menacing presence on the boundary, and he was a really good player last year in the regular season. If you remember, Alex, when we actually went in person to that game against Atlanta, he made a sick catch near the right sideline. That was awesome. And I think that Colin Johnson actually does have some talent and probably does deserve to have the opportunity to compete for a roster spot. Yeah, I think that he deserves to compete, but will he win that competition is the other question. Now, I don't know, because again, Isaiah Hodgins is here, and those two have kind of similar playing styles, and Hodgins is a little bit more proven, because he's actually gone into the regular season with the Giants, won some games, caught some touchdowns, and now he's playing postseason ball with the Giants. So he probably has an edge over Colin Johnson, who's a little bit more of an unknown commodity in terms of how he fits in Brian Daboll's scheme. But let's see this offseason what Colin Johnson does in training camp, because he might just force the issue. He might just press the matter and say, hey, I'm not going to give you an opportunity to cut me because I'm going to be so good that you're going to want me and Isaiah Hodgins out there on the boundaries opposite of one another. And that's totally possible. So again, I like Colin Johnson. I think he's a solid player. It's hard to imagine what his role could realistically be next season right now. But let's see how things shape out in the offseason, what kind of players the Giants sign or draft or trade for. And yeah, I think there's a window of opportunity for Colin Johnson to find his way onto the roster.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, while you were talking, I was kind of doing a little bit more digging on James Washington, and he has a pretty physical nature to his game. If you watch like most of his highlights, a lot of them are like jump balls. He's really good at elevating in the air and controlling his body. Really nice wingspan. He has some decent capabilities after the catch. He had a couple of nice catch and runs and was physical, and he's tough to bring down. Got a good stride about him. But, I don't know if he's going to fit our scheme perfectly because it seems like he's more of a physical, like, jump ball receiver. He does get open downfield a lot. I don't think that he's a guy that you're going to be utilizing those wide receiver screens or short route concepts. He's good at getting downfield. He's good at, creating some separation deeper in certain route concepts and route trees. But when you're looking at what the Giants have in their offensive line struggles at times, we don't really have time to allow these routes to develop downfield. Maybe next year that's different as we continue to grow and improve the offensive line in general. But James Washington's an interesting player. He's a guy that if the Giants are going to expand their deep passing game, could have some value, especially as a supplementary piece. Am I saying he's going to be a starter? Absolutely not. Like Anthony said earlier, he's more of a reserve. He's more of a guy that, fills in for injuries, maybe competes in maybe offers something on special teams, but he's a tough, gritty guy. He doesn't go down easy. He elevates really, really well in those jump balls. But again, we don't use Kenny Golladay for that, so why on earth would we use James Washington for that? And we're paying the guy $16 million, and we barely ever give him an opportunity. The only one we've seen was Davis Webb throwing it up, and Darius Slay actually spoke about that, I think, in a podcast a couple days ago after the game, and he essentially was like, yeah, that was pretty crazy. Like, he was like, I spent time with Kenny in Detroit, and, he used to do that stuff all the time, and he's capable of that. They're just, haven't used him properly or haven't used him the right way. So, the Giants obviously have not really been much of a throw it up and pray team when it comes to Kenny Golladay and Daniel Jones. They've been a lot more strategical in the way they're moving the football, relying on shorter, high probability throws, West Coast offense style stuff. But now, James Washington kind of fits the, riskier throw nature. So I don't necessarily think that he's going to be a great fit for the Giants, but who knows? Maybe he's changed his game a little bit, Anthony. What do you think about James Washington in terms of the future he may have on the team and what his role could end up being?
Yeah, I just think as a veteran wide receiver presence, he can be one of those guys that helps mature some of the younger players. He's been in the league for 5 years, so he's got some experience again playing with Ben Roethlisberger and the Pittsburgh Steelers many years ago. He was a solid player for Pittsburgh. He was not a number one receiver, but he was a number two, number three receiver who could be solid on a team. And honestly, he probably still could be. He could probably still be a solid number two or number three receiver. He was last season for Pittsburgh. He's still a solid number three. And if you didn't have the injury to James Washington in training camp, he probably would have had a pretty big role in Dallas's passing attack. I know they signed him with the intention of getting him pretty thoroughly involved in their passing attack, but the injury kind of just sidetracked everything. And now I think when you look at the Giants, a team that is kind of devoid of wide receiver talent for the most part, they can throw James Washington in there and rely on him. And I don't think he's necessarily one of those guys that has to make the risky jump ball catches, but I do think you bring up a good point there because, yeah, maybe the Giants aren't using Kenny Golladay correctly, but you have to keep in mind the Giants inherited Kenny Golladay. The new management, the new coaching staff, they inherited him. They did not sign him because he isn't a scheme fit. So yeah, they did inherit a great player, a great talent from a few years ago. Absolutely. Kenny Golladay used to be an excellent wide receiver in the NFL, but not in this scheme because you're right. The Giants are more strategic in this scheme. They don't like to chuck it up and pray. They don't like to throw Hail Marys or jump balls, 50-50s. You'll never see them throw a goal line fade. You'll see them come up with a clever play call to get someone open in space in the red zone. They're not just throwing it up and hoping for the best. And in Detroit, you had Matt Stafford, a lot of arm talent. You had Kenny Golladay. It worked out. But here with New York, that's just not how Daniel Jones plays. He doesn't take those risky throws now. He doesn't want to throw it up and pray. He would prefer to wait for a man to break open and throw. So what you're going to see this offseason probably, the Giants are going to reshape their wide receiver core, and James Washington could potentially have a position there because he can separate. He can get himself open. Kenny Golladay has never had good separation. He's never been a good route runner. He's never been able to get himself open. He's always made a living on 50-50 jump balls, contested catches. But the Giants don't want to throw those anymore. They don't want to play with contested catches. They want everyone to get open, so they want separators. That's why when Brian Dable was in Buffalo, they made it a point of emphasis to go out there and trade for Stephon Diggs, one of the best route runners, one of the best separators in the league. So this offseason, the Giants are going to make some moves at that position. They absolutely have to. But they're not going to target any big-bodied ex-receivers who go up there and make contested catches. They're going to target guys who get open. Separators. Those are who fit into this offensive scheme. And as you've seen, Isaiah Hodgins, a pretty solid route runner. He had a great double move. I broke it down on the channel yesterday. Great double move on Patrick Peterson to get open down the right sideline against the Vikings. That's a separator. But that's not Kenny Golladay, because Kenny Golladay doesn't run that double move and create 5 yards of separation. He runs a go route and catches a ball with a man in his face. And that's what you saw against the Eagles. That's exactly what he did. So that's the difference there. That's why Kenny Golladay has not fit with the New York Giants. It's why they have not used him properly. That's not their style of play. They're going to find those separators at the receiver position, and those are the players who are going to be most productive for them. And if James Washington can prove that he has the ability to separate during training camp or whatever, then yeah, he might have a role in the offense next season as a separator, as one of those receivers who can get the job done. But Alex, this also brings up an idea in my head, because we've mentioned this a few times this season. What is going to happen this offseason with Sterling Shepard? Now, Sterling Shepard is like your prototypical separator. He's a route runner. He's not a 50-50 ball guy. He's not going to go up there and moss anybody. He's a separator. But now he's coming off of back-to-back seasons with season-ending injuries. His contract is expiring. But he is such a perfect scheme fit for the New York Giants. So where do you think he fits in? And do the Giants maybe go ahead and re-sign him? Or do they just say it's time to say goodbye?
I think that you look at him as a good veteran minimum retention because he fits what we're trying to do on offense pretty well. I think he actually is exactly what we're looking for in terms of good route running. He's a good culture guy. He's a great locker room person. I don't think that he makes anywhere above $2 million coming off another significant injury. He's unreliable. And there's a lot of negatives that come with him on the field. Off the field, the guy is one of the best guys you can have in the locker room. You know what I mean? Like there is value there that goes unsaid and unseen. Sterling Shepard, a lot of people do not want him back. I would welcome him back with open arms if it was on a minimum deal. And I think that's, if he ends up staying healthy, which is a huge what if, you end up getting an unbelievable amount of value out of him. If he ends up, getting hurt again, you basically have no money allocated, and he's a great guy to have in the locker room, keeping everybody together, hyping everybody up. You see what he's done on the field and off the field this season. There's an asset to be had there, and I think that for the right price of $2 million, I feel like that's not a big deal. That's not a big commitment at all, and that's off the books after 1 year. Like you're paying a practice squad. Like, let's say you elevate someone from the practice squad for the season. You're paying them what, like $750K? I think Hodgins is making like $700K, something like that. If you double the price, you get Sterling Shepard, and Sterling Shepard, when healthy, is an experienced player who we know can perform well when he is available. Again, it's a lot easier said than done because he gets injured every single season. But the Giants are also, keep in mind, changing the MetLife turf, and that's where he's gotten injured both times. The Achilles, the ACL, both on the MetLife turf. They're changing that surface, so maybe that's the difference maker. Maybe he doesn't get hurt as often because of that. It might as well give it a shot, and I feel as though they're gonna keep him around personally, Anthony. I think that answers your question.
Yeah, it definitely does, and I agree. I'm willing to go further than just a veteran minimum contract, to be completely honest. I still think that Sterling Shepard, at his core, is a very solid player when he's healthy. Now, I understand being healthy is a problem and a struggle for him. He hasn't been able to stay healthy, but when he is healthy, he has been an excellent player for the New York Giants, and I think that he's still worth more than a veteran minimum. I don't think he's that old. I still think he's effective. Even when he was on the field before the injury, he was arguably the Giants' best playmaker, so I think that there's probably a little bit more room to go in terms of money for Sterling Shepard than just the veteran minimum. But in my opinion, I think it should be a priority to retain him. I think he should be back, not only just because he is a solid player, he's a separator, he's a perfect scheme fit, but because of what he does in the locker room. And that's what you mentioned, the unseen value. He is a very valuable player for the Giants just because of everything that he does for the players around him. He is a true leader. He honestly deserves a captain's patch. I'm surprised he didn't get one, but he is a real leader for the New York Giants. So I do want to see him back in Big Blue, and I think that the Giants should almost make it a priority to bring him back, retain him, to keep what's in the locker room with Sterling Shepard. You still see him on the sideline every single game, hyping up his boys. Like, he is at every single game. He's traveling with the team. He's going to the away games, and he's there hyping up the receivers when they make a big play, talking to Saquon Barkley on the sidelines. Like, he's still heavily involved with this team, despite not being able to go out there and suit up. And you got to respect that, and you got to really appreciate that if you're a Giants fan. This is a guy who bleeds blue, and that's what we want, right? We want Giants players who bleed blue the same way that Giants fans do. So I'm all in the boat of re-signing Sterling Shepard, giving him an extension, not breaking the bank for him, obviously, because of the injuries, but I think he has a role here, and he should be back in 2023.
100% agree, guys, but I'd love to hear your perspectives below on James Washington being added to the practice squads and Colin Johnson kind of ideas and concepts for next season. There's a lot to be had with this wide receiver core. This is going to go through a pretty significant overhaul, in my opinion, in this upcoming offseason, and it's going to be fun to break down, fun to watch, and take a look at all the different options for this Giants team. So for now, we're looking ahead to Sunday in the wild card, but hopefully we continue pushing beyond that, and we make it to the Super Bowl, and you win the freaking whole thing, and then we can really start to add more pieces to an already solid foundation. And that's the ultimate goal here, guys. But hope you guys enjoy the rest of this episode, the rest of this day, Wednesday. Awesome day to have a great day, as always. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys on the next Fireside Giants episode.
TVSO.